The public is being conditioned to watch the sky for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. Analysis of Russian readiness for a conventional war with NATO confirms a simple, brutal economic equation. They cannot afford a symmetric dollar-for-dollar conflict. The kinetic cost is prohibitive. This forces a protocol shift. The real vector of attack isn't loud, it's silent. The primary targets are not cities. They are the undersea fiber optic cables and the low Earth orbit satellites that function as the central nervous system of the Western economy. While Poland's foiled cyber attack on its energy grid is reported as a victory, RUSI analysts view it as a low-cost calibration test. The objective is not destruction, but disconnection, a systemic information blockade. This creates the blind Leviathan, a superior military and economic power that is suddenly deprived of data. Its markets cannot clear transactions. Its carrier groups cannot receive targeting data. Its command structure is paralyzed. States like Iran, which have demonstrated the capability to sever domestic internet access at will, possess the blueprint for this strategy. The goal is to trigger a systemic solvency crisis by creating an information vacuum. An adversary with $1 trillion military becomes a liability when its satellites are blinded and its data streams are cut. The silence is the true launch-on warning signal. A blinded Leviathan has only one protocol, a massive, uncoordinated kinetic response. This is not an unintended consequence. It is the engineered trigger. This response provides the weaker actor the precise justification required to escalate further up its own asymmetric ladder, where the final, most leveraged tool for regime survival awaits. This isn't a risk, it's the operating system. The primary question is never military. It is always economic. An extended kinetic war with NATO would trigger an immediate and terminal solvency crisis for the Russian Federation. The math is irrefutable. They cannot compete dollar for dollar, tank for tank. This is not an opinion. It is a balance sheet reality. CSAS analysis frames the conflict not as an invasion, but as a desperate measure to manage a domestic liability. An unpopular, high-cost kinetic war accelerates the drain on national liquidity and erodes political capital. This creates a feedback loop where the greatest threat to the regime is not a foreign army, but its own insolvency. Regime survival becomes the only metric. This economic weakness forces a pivot. It is a mathematical certainty. When symmetric engagement guarantees bankruptcy, the state actor has no choice but to adopt an asymmetric escalation protocol. They must abandon high-cost kinetic engagements and activate low-cost, high-leverage vectors of attack. The attempted cyber attack on Poland's energy infrastructure is the blueprint in action. This was not a military sortie, it was an economic one. The objective? Inflict a disproportionate liability crisis on a NATO member at a near-zero kinetic cost. Cripple their grid, trigger a solvency event, and degrade their capacity to project power, all without firing a single shot. This protocol is standardized for any state facing a superior conventional opponent. Iran's leadership, facing its own economic and military imbalance with the West, employs the same toolkit: proxy warfare, verbal warnings against escalation, and internal information blockades to manage domestic dissent. It is the universal operating system for the strategically disadvantaged. Therefore, understand the motive. These are not random acts of aggression. They are the calculated, logical consequences of economic weakness. The solvency crisis is the accelerant. Asymmetric warfare is the only available off-ramp to prevent total systemic collapse for the weaker state. It is a feature, not a bug, of the current global conflict architecture. The core of the asymmetric protocol is the economics of lethality. Analysis from institutions like the Royal United Services Institute, or ROSI, presents a fatal cost imbalance: a $5 million main battle tank versus a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a symmetric exchange. It is an economic execution. The math dictates the strategy. This is what strategists term the democratization of violence. The monopoly on projecting devastating force, once held exclusively by nation-states with trillion-dollar defense budgets, has been shattered. The capability to neutralize a state-level, high-value asset has been handed to any actor who can afford consumer electronics. For a state actor like Russia, facing a superior NATO force, this is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty. When publications like The Times question their readiness for war, they miss the point. Russia cannot afford a kinetic, dollar-for-dollar conflict. They are structurally forced to trade their $500 asset for a multi-million-dollar liability. It is the only profitable trade available. This creates a solvency crisis for the superior power. The cost to defend becomes exponentially greater than the cost to attack. This same economic logic drives non-kinetic vectors, such as the attempted cyber attack on Poland's energy infrastructure. The objective is identical. Use a low-cost tool to create a disproportionately high-cost liability, triggering systemic failure far from any battlefield. The theater of operations is not where legacy media directs your focus. It is in the systemic shadows, the gray zones. These regions of manufactured instability are not the primary conflict. They are laboratories. According to CSIS analysis, these are proxy staging grounds, designed to test the solvency and response protocols of Western alliances far from the kinetic front lines. Examine the data from Poland. The recently foiled cyber attack on its energy infrastructure, source number 1, was not a failure. It was a successful intelligence operation. The objective was not to black out the country, but to calibrate a weapon. It measured NATO's cyber defense response times, identified systemic vulnerabilities, and calculated the precise non-kinetic cost required to create a disproportionate liability for a frontline state. This is the playbook. Impose massive economic and logistical costs without triggering a kinetic escalation protocol. This asymmetric protocol is actor-agnostic. Iran's public warnings against U.S. escalation, source number 2, are not empty rhetoric. They are a function of its proven gray zone capabilities. Its regime has demonstrated the ability to sever domestic internet access at will, source number 4, creating an information blockade. This is a critical field test. It proves they can control the internal narrative and suppress dissent while simultaneously deploying proxy forces externally. It decouples their foreign policy from domestic political risk. Therefore, the question posed by legacy outlets, is Russia ready for war with NATO? Source number 3 is strategically irrelevant. The math shows they cannot afford a symmetric dollar-for-dollar kinetic war. Their readiness is measured differently. According to RUSI threat assessments, their strength is a direct function of their success in these gray zone laboratories. These probes are the mechanism for engineering a solvency crisis in an adversary before a conventional war ever begins. This is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty of the current operating system. The launch on warning doctrine is a Cold War protocol with a fatal digital flaw. The logic was simple. If early warning radar detects incoming enemy missiles, you must launch a retaliatory strike before your own silos are destroyed. It is a use-it-or-lose-it decision matrix designed to guarantee mutually assured destruction. This entire system hinges on one asset: trusted data from radar and satellites. However, the modern battlefield is asymmetric. State actors now target critical infrastructure with non-kinetic attacks. We have confirmation of a foiled cyber attack targeting Poland's energy grid, as per source number 1. The same vector can be applied to military command and control. This creates the fog of digital war. When a cyber attack successfully blinds an early warning system, the screens go black. The commander now faces a systemic dilemma. Is this a technical glitch, or is it the first move in a decapitation strike? The protocol offers no room for ambiguity. RUSI and CSIS analysts confirm that for a conventionally weaker actor, Inducing this paralysis is a high-leverage strategic play. Forcing a superior power into a launch decision based on zero visibility creates a disproportionate liability. The fear of inaction, of losing the entire arsenal, becomes the adversary's primary weapon. The commander is forced to launch out of fear. The doctrine, designed for a symmetric world of verifiable physics, is short-circuited by unverifiable data. This isn't a bug in the system. It is the core feature of 21st century asymmetric escalation. The kinetic cost of the cyber attack is near zero. The potential outcome is a global solvency crisis. The reported cyber attack on Polish energy infrastructure was not a failure. It was a rangefinder. State actors, unable to afford a symmetric, kinetic war with NATO, are mathematically required to find asymmetric leverage. CSS reports confirm the pre-positioning of dormant malware inside Western critical infrastructure. This is not for a first strike. It is for escalation control. The objective is to create a disproportionate liability, to find a vector where a $1 cyber weapon can inflict $1 billion of economic damage and solvency pressure. The next phase of this protocol is the calibration shot. It must be severe enough to demonstrate capability, but deniable enough to prevent a unified kinetic response. Its purpose is to test NATO's decision-making cycle under systemic economic stress. Analysts at RUSI have noted that Russia's strategic playbook, much like Iran's, relies on creating crises that exploit the slower response times of democratic alliances. An information blockade or regional internet shutdown, as seen in Iran, is a tool for internal control. The external version targets an adversary's logistical cohesion. Therefore, the high-probability event is a logistics blackout at a major Northern European container port within the next 12 months. An attribution impossible ransomware event will not demand money, but will simply erase bills of lading and container manifests. The kinetic cost is zero. The solvency crisis for shipping, insurance, and manufacturing will be immediate. This is not an act of war, it is a hostile balance sheet transaction. It is the necessary, logical test before escalating to a higher asymmetric lever.